Hey guys, hey YouTube. Today we're going to take a look at behavioral economics, and I think it's a really underappreciated topic in economics. And I think it's, for the year 12 economists here, I think it's something that we really should be including in the A-level course. I personally found it extremely useful. So, why does behavioral economics exist? Traditional economic models, they assume that people make rational, stable preferences and utility maximizing decisions, but in reality, real world behavior often contradicts this. People procrastinate, panic sell, and follow crowds. And by incorporating behavioral psychology, we can better understand economic behavior in the markets. So, what is the traditional economic model? While elegant and useful, and it provides a baseline good foundation where, in most cases it serves its purpose. It assumes that agents are rational, they have stable preferences, and weigh costs and benefits, equally. However, when does the model break down? Many consumers, and I guarantee almost all of you here will do the same, you make inconsistent choices and decision making that is influenced by emotions. The context matters. And the thing is with these is that these mistakes aren't just random. They occur in predictable patterns, which allows us to create theories and biases so we can predict when there's irrationality in the market. So let's talk about bounded rationality. It's first suggested by Herbert Simon, and it suggests that because there's limited information, time, and cognitive capacity, people will, rather than picking the utility maximizing option, they'll go for the good enough option. They'll suffice. In reality, people make mental shortcuts called heuristics. They're useful because they're efficient, and in complex situations, it's an easy way to make a decision, but it can also lead to systematic judgment errors. For example, pattern recognition or anything else like that. So a main thing that I want to talk about is biases, cognitive biases, and it's a very, key vertice of behavioral economics. I've just included a few examples here, but there's actually far more in reality. But just to talk about them, anchoring bias is when people rely too heavily on the initial piece of information. But an availability bias is when individuals judge probability on how easily examples come to mind. And overconfidence being when people overestimate their knowledge, skill, or accuracy. For example, having a good return on a portfolio, even when it was just a bull market. I also talk about prospect theory. It's one of the biggest parts of behavioral economics as well. It suggests that losses are felt more strongly than equivalent gains. So people are more averse to losses and they are more impacted by them rather than the same gains. Framing effects is something else I'd like to talk about. Another vertice of behavioral economics. And essentially, it talks about the effect of framing perspectives and choices, even given, the freedom to pick anything. The way that people will frame it can lead consumers to specific choices. Real-world applications of behavioral economics is limitless. For example, the financial crisis or bubbles, herd behavior. It explains a lot of market failures, and even something as contemporary as, say, for example, Labubus, right? I mean, I'm sure all of you know about Labubus, and it's definitely a case of herd behavior. I mean, I don't even know what they are, and I was tempted to buy one as well. And it's something that I found useful not only in finance, but making day-to-day decisions and helping me to more critically think about decisions. So another application is nudges and policy, and it's a bit of an ethical discussion because what it is, well, nudges are when the government or other firms, they use framing effects to influence people to pick a specific choice. For example, everyone here is enrolled in a pension unless you choose otherwise. So that default option, triggers inertia in people and a status quo bias, which means that people are inclined to not want to change the current state of things and are unwilling to act. So people are more likely to stay with the pension choice. Criticisms of behavioral economics are, in my opinion, scarce, but still important to consider. As we just mentioned, nudges in policy, it's a question of, is it ethical to really manipulate people into wanting to pick a specific choice? As well as that, the biases that we cover are all lab experiments, and I suppose they don't generalize over the whole population as accurately as we might wish. But I think that even so, it's still a good representative of the entire population. I think we'll come to the final slide here for key takeaways of behavioral economics. And it's that humans are boundedly rational. Whilst they are irrational at times, we know what the bounds are, and we can predict when they're rational and irrational. And it's important to note that behavioral economics doesn't replace traditional economic models, but it complements them. It's a valuable addition, in my opinion, and something that should absolutely be taken into consideration. That's the end of my presentation. And if there's any questions, I'd like to open the floor up to them. Yeah, Kaushik? Oh yeah, of course. I'm always available to connect with others. I'll have to check my schedule, but I'll send you an email when I'm free. Saksham?
Can behavioral economics predict whether this new AI is actually just a giant economic bubble or not?
Yeah, there's many discussions going on about that right now as well. For example, there's discussions of overconfidence happening in markets, which means that people think they know more about AI than they really do. As well as that, of course, hoarding behavior. Everyone's buying into AI and tech. And whenever someone asks me, what stock should I buy? They always bring up the same names, NVIDIA, Palantir, and Meta, but without doing the proper research, they're just wanting to herd towards that and buy it. So I think with any market situation, behavioral economics applies. Sama?
What makes nudges unethical? Because if the government uses nudges to do something that's more beneficial for everyone, that's not inherently ethical.
Yeah. I see your point, but the ethical concern here is that who decides what's wrong and right? The government, right? But don't you think that we should leave people free to make their own decisions despite, even if despite these, manipulative techniques, people should be free to make their own choices even if they don't know, what they are.
I think maybe that comes down to whether you believe markets.
Yeah.
Do you believe that
Markets fully. I don't think so, because I think any market has failures, and I think it's hard to correct them all the time. So, Will?
I know you mentioned the behavioral economics solution taught in
behavioral
economics specification. Are there specific areas that you think would
Yeah.
be most impactful?
Well, yeah. I think behavioral biases and their play in market failures, I think that's an important one, because sometimes we will be in lesson and they'll say, oh, the market fails here, but you want to ask the question, why does that happen? And a better understanding does help in your exams as well, because what to say and what to do. Isan?
So what's the biggest example in your life of behavioral economics?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think day to day, but even something as simple as, if I'm reading the news and it's about, say, plane crashes are, because they're big events, they always come on the news. So I might at first thought be thinking, oh, plane crashes are common, they happen all the time, but that's only because of the availability bias, because I've seen it on the news. When in reality, for example, car crashes, they happen often so they don't come on the news as much. But because of that, I might think that, oh, car crashes aren't as common as plane crashes. Or even, for example, in finance, if I'm researching something, if I fall under confirmation bias, if I'm reading some information and I think, am I objectively evaluating the information, or am I just looking for what's gonna support my initial judgment of, like, say for example, if it's going up or not? Kaushik?
What extent was it to consider like the ethical, ethical impact of like taking decisions based on behavioral economics? Like if some like major tragedy occurs, and then you use that to make a decision, you think that's ethical?
I think it's a debate, right? I think it depends on the person, but in my opinion, I mentioned the ethical concerns, but in my opinion, I don't think it's like that bad of a thing. So I would say, yeah, go for it. Arush?
How does like game theory link to this?
Uh,
Use one to like
But I think a key thing in game theory is like people need to act rationally. So like, and also in a self-interested way. So like in a dominant strategy, people are just going to pick what's best for themselves. And I think, that plays into behavioral economics in the sense that you need to think critically and not like, oh, what if someone else also, like, I guess, admits to a crime, for like the prisoner's dilemma. You need to think, in a self-interested way and only yourself. I think that's, the rationality in thinking and recognizing your own biases is where it plays in. Nag?
So companies nowadays are doing things called like neuromarketing, where they're using like signals to like psychologically manipulate what people are going to do. Like for example, in a wine shop, they play German music, like German wine, things like that. There've been studies on that. To what extent do you think it's ethical for companies to be like psychologically manipulate people to make certain decisions based on their lessons?
I think the question isn't should we stop firms from marketing in that way, but it's to educate consumers about behavioral biases, because that way, once you like recognize what the biases are, like in my experience, you can like easily recognize when also someone's trying to like, well, like there's marketing and it's a framing effect. You can easily realize. So I think it's, and again, we're in like a capitalist economy, so there's not much you can do against that. So I think the best solution is educating consumers on that. This on?
Ignoring ethics, right? If you were the owner of a big corporation like Alan Tim, what would you do that would be most effective to manipulate
Well, ignoring ethics, I would manipulate consumers using nudges and framing effects, because that is, despite ethical concerns, it is a very effective way to improve outcomes at a low cost. Yeah, Kaushik?
What are your thoughts on insider trading?
On insider trading, oh, I think you know it's pretty, well, it's illegal, right? So it's probably not the best thing to do. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Is that it?
That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.